And so I just started kind of like shaking the window. And there was a panel that had to be removed before every window could be removed. And so this time I didn't remove the panel first, and so it was kind of stuck, and so I was shaking it. And then all I remember is that this huge shard of glass just landed on my arm and severed pretty much to the bone. And all I remember seeing is just like a fountain of red.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Faith Laid Hold, a faith based podcast. I am Jerome Heaven,
And I'm Luan.
and Faith Laid Hold. I'm going to read a little intro on this
Yeah.
podcast. Faith Laid Hold is a podcast and ministry devoted to rediscovering the gospel of Jesus Christ as the power of God unto salvation. We believe true faith doesn't wait to feel something, it lays hold of God's promises before they're seen or felt. In a time when many Christians lack assurance or misunderstand grace, we're here to bridge the gap between cheap belief and Christ centered transformation. Each episode, we open the Word of God and press toward the mark, Philippians 3:14, walking through topics like righteousness by faith, abiding in Christ, and living a life of surrender and victory. Whether if you've walked away from church, feel stuck in your Christian life, or are seeking something deeper, you're not alone. We're on this journey too. So that's a quick soundbite into what we'll be discussing. There's a lot that God's been doing in our lives, and we're excited to see what He's going to bring about as we go through this.
Amen.
But this is episode 1. So we're pretty excited. So this episode, what we're going to be talking about is our testimonies. Who are we? What is our background? What makes us capable to discuss these topics? And we're excited to share.
Amen.
So I think Luan's going first on this one. We'll see. How do you feel, Luan?
I'm feeling good, man. I'm feeling good. Yeah, I can go first. So, man, I'm trying to think. I've been trying to think,
Give,
where do I
give, give me the
start
beginning, man. Give me the beginning. So
the
when you were
begin?
born, it was a cold day in 1985.
It's funny. You know, when I look back at when like my actual date of birth is January 16, which, with me being Brazilian, January 16 typically doesn't mean anything. In Brazil, there's no holiday that's correlated to it. But being here in the States, sometimes it lands on MLK Day, and so that's a fun fact. But with also in my old life of loving superheroes and stuff, it was so funny when I realized that January 16 of 1995 was a Monday, and so I would joke around in high school and kind of quote Solomon Grundy from Batman, born on a Monday.
Born on a Monday. Okay.
So, so Luan de Carmo, born on a Monday. That was kind of my catchphrase. And so, yeah, so born on a Monday. So, but yeah, so anyway, I was born in Brazil. Uh, Moved to the States when I was 3. I am now 30, and so I've been here pretty much my whole entire life, 27 years, I think, if my math is mathing. And so, yeah, I was born in Brazil, came here to the States, just immigrant, just living a struggle life, most of my life, especially most of my early life, I'd say, because God's been very good to me and my family, for the last 10, 15 years. But was not born Christian. I was not part of a Christian family. My parents at the time were into spiritualism and very secular life, just, drinking, eating all kinds of food, uh, watching all kinds of entertainment. I'm sure my mom won't mind me sharing this, but she used to enjoy a little bit of scary films. And there's a few times where I remember, she might not remember this, but there's a few times where she would be on the couch late at night watching a scary movie, and I knew that she was watching something, and I'll just kind of like peek my head over the wall to see what she was watching, and ended up watching 30 minutes to an hour of it just in the corner behind the couch while she was watching, in front of her screen. So I was introduced to some evil stuff early on in my life, and it kind of paved the way for my love of media early on. And then my dad was really big into sci-fi movies, and so I got introduced to Terminator, Predator, Star Wars, the typical 80s, 90s, sci-fi movies that pretty much created a whole genre of itself. That was kind of like how I grew up, and then it wasn't until some point, um, kindergarten age, first grade age, where my parents started to be around other Brazilians that were, Christian, labeled Christian. And so we started to shift a little bit in my dynamic of growing up. And then it wasn't until I think first grade, or like right before I was getting ready to go into first grade, my parents found out about the Adventist Church. And they have a whole testimony of themselves. So I don't find it fair on my end to share their testimony, because again, I was a child. So I'm just vaguely going over some details from my perspective. But their testimony is very powerful, very beautiful. But yeah, so they came into the Adventist Church when I was in first grade. They got baptized, and then I think it was maybe, when was it? I got baptized either 2003 or 2005. So I was either in third or fifth grade at the time. Got baptized to Adventist Church. Had the whole Bible studies, going through the fundamental beliefs, and got baptized because I agreed with everything. And so, growing up as a child, maybe some people can relate that are Adventists. There's a lot of do's and don'ts, not fully understanding why you do and don't. You understand that God made laws, and being of our faith, we have certain counsel on things that we should do or shouldn't do. And so, again, just from our human understanding, not being fully connected to God, and wanting to, just a lot of trying to figure things out on your own because you're not getting proper counsel, proper mentorship. And so you're just kind of reading the text and just trying to do the best based off your interpretation. So there was a lot of that. And then when I got to high school, started hanging around a lot of different people that I cared a lot for, and just, wanting to kind of fit in with everyone. You kind of start to do things that's a little different than how were raised or taught. And so start to get into more, worldly things, unfortunately, because it's just people that you're around. Not blaming the people itself, the friends I had. I don't blame them at all. But, it just comes with the territory. And so it
You're just doing
wasn't
what you do.
exactly, exactly. And so it wasn't until college, um, college age, I went to Adventist University for about a semester, and then left because of,
About a semester.
no, literally just a semester, because in that semester I switched my major 3 times, and none of the
Wow.
credits would move over. So it's just a complete waste of time. It was a complete waste of time.
Right. It's funny because I think a lot of people can relate.
I think so too. I think so too. And so because of that, I didn't think it was the smart idea to continue down that path of just, high tuition costs, not knowing what you want to do. And so I took what was supposed to be a year off to figure out. It just became a part of my lifestyle, to just not go back to school. So I just started working at that point. I enjoy the process of the idea of climbing up the ladder, the career ladder at different jobs I was at. Around that time, I got married to my beautiful wife. And again, I would do the whole church scene. I would still go to church every Sabbath, um, but I didn't have a relationship with God. Um, it was just more of became a tradition, and I knew it was the right thing to go to church, but I didn't have a like I said, I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't have a devotional life. It would happen here and there, but it wasn't anything where it was consistent. Um, and so that was pretty much my life in my early to mid 20s. And then I went to just going from job to job after that, because again, it was just a lot of getting tired of, the situation I was at. Not because I was a quitter, but I always put my best into everything, and I was always ambitious, and I always wanted to grow. And there's always limitations that was set on me that I couldn't control, and so I was like, I gotta make more money, especially being married young. It's like you promise your in-laws that you're going to provide for their daughter, and you want to, as a man, you want to uphold that commitment, right? Because I had a conversation with my father-in-law, and I wanted to stick to what I told him, that I'll provide for his daughter, I'll take care of his daughter. Anyway, so started working, went to different jobs, and would make a little bit of money. We were okay, definitely low income for sure, but even thinking back at it, God was providing even back then. But I think it wasn't until I think I was 25, 25, 26. I started working for a factory job, making little treats. I'm sure that I don't have to necessarily say the name for people to kind of guess what that is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so when I was there, I came across a buddy of mine. Well, at the time I didn't know him, but we're friends now, and he was a Christian. And then I remember I'd stay up because he used to work third shift, and I used to work second shift. But at this company, you could work overtime as much as you want, basically. And so I would work from like 2:30 p.m. to like 2:30 in the morning. And this happened for some time. And when I was there, I came across this guy who we pretty much connected pretty early because we were both into movies, and we had that in common. And then, but what was interesting about him was that he would always bring up Jesus in our conversations. And that was one of the first times I met someone that was like in my age group that had that that part of him, that was just so organic. It was so natural. It was never forced. It was always like, even if we were talking about, like, for example, The Matrix, he would just tie it into the gospel. And so
Mm.
that I thought was pretty interesting. And so I remember as we started to talk more, I can't remember exactly how long it was till he asked me this question that pretty much changed my life. Let's say it was a week or two after first meeting him. He asked me a question because he found out that I was Adventist, and and then he started asking me a bunch of different questions, but then he asked me this question that you would think he asked me, like, when were the manuscripts discovered, like, something that actually takes some thought into coming up with the answer.
Mm.
He asked me a question that, again, it changed my whole trajectory to where I am now. And that question was, what is the gospel? he asked me, "So Luan, what is the gospel?" And I remember at first I'm thinking like, "Oh, this is gonna be a simple question to answer," and then sure enough, it took probably 5 minutes to come up with an answer that even today, I don't remember exactly what I told him, but even today, it wouldn't be necessarily the correct answer. So it took me 5 minutes to give the simple question for someone that's a Christian, right? Someone that claims to be a Christian to answer
Mm-hmm.
what is the gospel.
It
And
seems
at
like an
that,
obvious question, right? Like an
you
obvious question, an obvious answer. You say, "Oh, gospel, boom, 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 boom."
exactly,
But if you're not having a relationship with Jesus, it's like, what is the gospel? I don't know. Jesus is up there. I'm here. I'm doing my thing. It's hard to
E-
kind of have a real answer because it's a relationship thing.
exactly, exactly. And so at that moment, I, I felt embarrassed, and pride definitely started kicking in because again, maybe you know this, or maybe some people have heard this as well, that being a part of the Adventist Church or Adventist movement, that we are the Church of the Bible, that we are the remnant church,
Hmm.
and those kind of buzzword labels. And so for you to claim, or for me rather, for me to claim that I'm a part of this church that claims to be the Church of the Bible and not being able to respond a simple question on what is the gospel, it was very embarrassing for me. It was
Yeah.
truly embarrassing. But I will say this: my friend did not make me feel dumb. He didn't make me feel like he didn't make me feel any. He didn't say anything that was negative. He didn't make any sly comment. He was very kind, very understanding, and so I thank him a lot for his willingness to just talk about God, and
Hmm.
even with the connotation that comes with someone that's Adventist when they're not, to just that could have been his opportunity to just boast and just say like, oh yeah, see, you're not the Church of God or whatever. So
Hmm.
I thank him for that, but that kind of sent me down a path of searching and
Yeah.
studying, and because again he was not Adventist, and he would bring up a lot of different doctrines from his faith, and it sounded convincing because again he that was his it was his conviction, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew in the back of my mind, or subconsciously, I knew that I didn't agree with that. Not with everything. There's certain things that I aligned with, but it's just the interpretation was not how I understood it. And so I started reading for myself, started studying, and more God started to show himself to me. But again, at this point wasn't because I wanted to know God, it was just to uh win a debate, basically. So again,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't a Christ-centered um study per se.
Experience.
It
Hmm.
was just like trying to come up with as many facts as I can, kind of like those Jordan and LeBron debates on who's the GOAT. Just
Hmm.
coming up with every single stat just so you can prove the other person wrong or whatever.
Yep.
But so but again, at the time I was studying or just reading, and I don't remember actually having like debates with him after that. Because
Mm.
shortly after, I can't remember exactly the timeline, but I eventually left again, and it was again wanting to move up the ladder, just a lot of stuff that didn't allow me to do it. So ended up going to a different field, which was working for a real estate investor, and I was pretty much an admin type guy for him, just doing paperwork, payroll, stuff like that. And this was around the time that COVID was still kind of a part of our society, just a part of the culture. And so at the time, there wasn't that many. Uh, workers that were available to do work because he had a lot of remodeled type homes, and he was building homes at the same time. He's a very successful guy. He was about, I think at the time he was like 2 years older than I was. So again, very successful. He was already a millionaire because of his portfolio that he had with all the properties he owned. And so again, I was learning a lot from him. I wanted to kind of be like him. But so one day I had to work for him. That was more labor style. Because again, I just did a lot of desk work for him, a lot of admin, be on calls and stuff. But he was behind on one of the remodel jobs that he had, and so he asked if I could fill in and just help out. And so I was like, yeah, sure, not a problem. I get to the house, and he wanted me to remove some storm windows from this house. It was an older, like mid-century home, and so he wanted me to remove the windows. I didn't know how to exactly, so I just did a quick little YouTube video and just kind of figured it out. I think there's like 8 windows
YouTube
total.
University. Wow.
Exactly, exactly. So I think there's like 8 windows total, and I was doing it. Um, and but I remember the eighth window was like the last window before I could just call it quits on the job and go home or whatever. I wasn't focused, and so I just started kind of like shaking the window. And there was a panel that had to be removed before every window could be removed. And so this time I didn't remove the panel first, and so it was kind of stuck, and so I was shaking it. And then all I remember is that this huge shard of glass just landed on my arm and severed pretty much to the bone. And all I remember seeing is just like a fountain of red just gushing. And thankfully there was a guy that was working at the house as well. He was in the kitchen, and I was in the room next door. And I just remember walking, maybe running to him, and just from my perspective, from what I remember, I said it calmly, like, "Hey man, I'm bleeding out." And I just remember after that waking up in the hospital.
Mm.
So when I get to the hospital, the doctors, I'm in huge amounts of pain, and the doctor tells me that, if it wasn't for the guy putting his weight on my arm, because I evidently had passed out on the ground, and so he immediately jumped and put his knees on my arm to kind of stop the bleeding. He said that if he didn't stop the bleeding, that there was a high chance that I would have suffered a cardiac arrest, and if there wasn't anyone at that house, that I could have been dead. And once he said that, I immediately started to cry. Well, he left the room that I was in, because again, I didn't want him to see me just break down. But as soon as he
Uh-huh.
left, I immediately started crying
Mm.
because it hit me that I could have died at that moment. And I remember my wife at the time was in Atlanta with our daughter, and I was in the neighboring state. Um, so she was at least 2 hours away, and she didn't know where I was. And I think my boss, the real estate investor, he found out about it because the other guy called him, and but they didn't know what hospital I was in. So he I remember calling my wife, and my wife is just panicking, and they're calling all the hospitals in the state, well, where we live, the general location where we live, and they finally found out where I was. But after that, that's pretty much where I really started to get closer to God, because I realized that God gave me a second chance, because he saw that the life that I was heading was not for heaven. It was not suited
Mm.
for heaven. And so since then, which was probably 5 years ago now, I have been studying and reading and having devotion, learning how to pray. And I know that my brother and my family were praying for me all these years. And I also found out that you were praying for me. And that actually was kind of what connected us together. Because I remember I was talking to my brother, asking him a lot of different questions about our faith and just things I was studying. And I remember him mentioning to me that he would talk on the phone with you regularly. And he was saying that like 100% of the conversation was just about spiritual things. And at the time, I wanted that. I wanted to talk more about God, and I wanted to have friendships that was more focused on that. And so when he told me that you were one of the ones that was praying for me, I felt compelled to want to reach out to you. And again, because again, I was so happy with the idea that you and him are always talking on the phone together, talking about God. I was like, you know what? Let me try to call Jerome. I think I don't remember exactly. I was actually talking to my wife about this last 2 nights ago or something, because I was just kind of like reflecting back on everything, and then how this process, this idea of this podcast starting. So I was just kind of trying to remember how things started, and I think I remember. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember me texting you or calling you and just kind of saying like, you know, wanting to reconnect or just to catch up or something. And I just remember finally getting on the phone with you and then just talking and just kind of catching up on how we met and stuff. And I guess we can talk about that in a little bit on how we met. But yeah, so I remember calling you or you calling me, and we just started talking. And ever since then, we've been pretty much consistently talking to each other
Mhm.
every day or every other day. At least I would say 10 hours a week, 8 to 10 hours a week.
Easy.
Yeah,
Second job.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I was just listening to your story and thinking about how good God is. Um, because yeah, at this point, I don't even know if I need to tell my story because that story is it's a moving testimony, man. Um,
Praise the Lord.
but thinking about it, like I met Luan at least what 12 years, 13 years ago, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It feels like a long time nowadays. But it
exactly.
was a long time ago when we were at summer camp
Before we had
and we
facial
were
hair.
not before we had facial hair, we weren't thinking about righteousness.
No.
We weren't thinking about the idea of being Christians. We were thinking about
Mm-hmm.
how to have a good time. Um, and it's amazing because like I'm literally as I'm sitting here right now, I'm visualizing Luan when we were kids, and he was wearing like a t-shirt and some jean shorts,
Yep.
and I don't think there was stuff you could buy at the store. I think they were custom made.
They were.
Um,
They
but
were. They
yeah,
were.
like custom made, made at home. If just in case you guys didn't know, Luan was always a fashion guy. No matter like throughout all these years ago, he was the guy into all the fashion. I would get my trends from him, and there's a bunch of stories that I'm sure we'll talk about as we continue to go through this podcast. Um, but it's interesting because like Luan was always the center of the party. Even the people who didn't know him was drawn into him. He was always someone who led other people. I guess he made people feel comfortable, and he led those people like to want to be friends with him. And he could always be that person who could always align everybody so everybody would get along. And it was amazing. I mean, the stories I could tell you about just like when we were kids, people are like, "Oh, you know Luan?" It's like, "No, I don't know him." You got to get to know him. He knows all these people. So it's amazing to see like where we were at then, where he was at then. Because obviously, like I think it's interesting. Because the thing I think as Christians that we don't talk about, we think that everybody needs to have like the same personality, the same character, the same everything. And what I've been noticing is that God created us all with different personalities, right? Everybody's different. And when I think about the personality traits of Luan, even then he was a man of God before he even knew it. It was given to him. But I don't think he really saw that because we were kids. Like we wanted to have fun. We wanted to do what we thought was cool, usually looking at media or whatever to outline to us what was cool. But he always had those character traits, like those personality traits that made him who he was. Um, and it's amazing to see how God works to redeem us even when we're working away from it. Like a lot of times, like if we're being honest, we're pedaling away from God a lot of the time, and then God has to drag us back. Like I've been talking to Luan lately, especially this last week, about how I'm noticing in the Bible about how or Jesus is the shepherd and that we are the sheep. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing that kind of flow because I'm realizing that a lot of the time, even though I could be with Jesus for today, I'm finding myself looking for nicer grass on the other side.
Mm.
And it's so wild that Jesus has to come with his little, if you see any pictures of Jesus with that like sheep hook, with that rod with like a little sheep hook, and he's dragging
Mm-hmm.
people back. I'm noticing that that's really what the relationship looks like for us Christians. And I've seen how God kind of rerouted Luan and carried him on the other end. And I mean, just the conversation before, like we reconnected, just me and his brother connecting and saying like, he would say like Jerome, like Luan's not the same Luan. And I said, what do you mean? Luan's the life of the party. Everybody wants to be like Luan. And he would always be like, no, Luan's not the same. You have to talk to him. You have to connect with him again because he's different. And he kept on saying it. And I'm not talking about like one offs. He would say this daily. He's like, yeah, Luan's not the same. And I think that's what it looks like when Jesus comes into our life and he does that transformation. When he does it, people look at us and they're like, oh, yeah, they're not the same. So praise God on that, man.
Praise the Lord.
Um, there's so many questions I want to ask you. I don't want to really get into my testimony at this point because I almost want to save that to the next episode.
Okay.
But yeah, I think maybe we should do that because I think there's some questions that I feel like people are probably thinking. I know I'm
Okay.
thinking about it because, like, looking back at your life, you're saying your parents were into spiritualism, right? Like, and I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, they're just like, man, Christians, a lot of you guys, you're a little over the top. What do you mean spiritualism? Were they over there with a Ouija board? Were they over there like doing seances, right? And I think there's like this connotation that it's like, oh, like as Christians, we're going a little too far. But like with where they were in their life of being spiritualists, like were they happy with where they were at, you would say? Like did they seem like growing up that they were happy?
So from what I remember talking to them or hearing their testimony, they, my mom, for the one that's the first person that comes to mind, she was not happy. She was always trying to find meaning and purpose in her life, and I think she felt that religion was going to be something that would bring that'll fill in that void. And so she was always God was always leading her and my dad as well. I genuinely believe that because again my whole family from my yeah, actually from both sides, we don't have that many Christians. I think most of them are either Catholic, and I would say nominal. I don't think any of them really practice. Maybe one or two do, but I think most of them are just nominal. And because again, in Brazil, Catholicism is pretty much the major religion, and so I think a lot of them are Catholic just by name, and then others
Mm,
don't believe in God or just live like the world. And so
yeah.
God was definitely leading them. And then as far as like the spiritualism side of it, from the conversation I remember having with my mom, I think they were not exactly Ouija boards, but they were definitely, you know, having meetings. I don't know who would host them, but they would talk
Mhm.
to, you know,
People
relatives
they
that,
probably shouldn't.
yeah, relatives that no
Yeah.
longer exist. That
Mm,
they have been buried for many years, and so they were having conversations with that, and so it was definitely very dark. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what, and for them, they didn't think anything of it. It was just normal to them. So yeah, so thankfully I didn't experience any of that. I didn't see any of that. Um,
mhm.
but I heard about it.
Interesting.
Or if I was there, I was too young to remember, or God mercifully removed those memories from my mind. Because again,
Mm,
I don't really remember. I just know based off their conversations and things that they've brought up. But even then, when they bring it up, they don't get too much into the details because again, we're not giving power to the enemy. So,
Amen.
but yeah, so yeah, that's yeah. So they were definitely deep. So basically, anything that my parents were into, they were pretty much 100% invested in that. So
Mm.
when they came across Christianity, I think they first got introduced to the Baptist movement, and so they were definitely into that. They still had a lot of questions, and um, the questions that they had, the pastor was not able to give them clear, concise answers, and so again, they were always seeking truth, and kind of, I think that characteristic of theirs has been something that I've maybe hereditarily just kind of got because I'm always
The
wanting to know the
drive.
truth. Yeah, I've always
Mhm.
wanted to know the truth of something. Like I've always believed that there is a truth to something. It's not just opinion. And so I do thank them for that, and seeing that in them kind of motivated me growing up. That I've always wanted to learn, even though I wasn't a good student in school. I kind of just always passed by the grade. I was a B low A student. Um,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't,
Just
I
skating through.
wasn't, yeah, pretty much. I probably could have done better in school if I cared, but
Mhm.
I guess kind of like how you said, I cared more about the social side of school, having
Uh-huh.
friends, joking around. I was a class clown, but I didn't really get in trouble. It was kind of weird. I kind of got away with a lot. So again, I
Uh-huh.
don't condone that, but it was yeah. So I like the fun. I like hanging out with friends. So school came second, but I used to love watching documentaries, like animal documentaries. I had a lot of like
Mhm.
um, I can't remember like those world Guinness World Record books, um, where they'll have like every year they'll have a new one. I'll
Yeah.
have like what are they called? They weren't almanacs, but something similar where it was just like a bunch of random facts, and so I always was interested in stuff like that. So even
Yeah.
now, my wife, she talks about how my YouTube algorithm is just so crazy to her because I have the most random videos, and I just
Mhm.
watch pretty much all of them, and so I just love random facts. I have like literally a
You can
memory
learn.
bank. Yeah, and so I can pretty much have a conversation with anyone about anything because I've just have a little bit of information for everything, so I can keep up with a conversation. And so
Mm.
I recognize that even that God has been using that um, for His glory.
Well, praise the Lord for that. I'm thinking because, like, a lot of times, I think as Christians, like, and people outside looking at Christians, the biggest thing that people ask are you happy? Because I think a lot of people come into or take this idea of Christianity or come into Christianity with this idea that people there are not really happy. They're just going through the motions.
Hmm.
So to see that your parents are happy, and I feel like you're also happy, indicates that there must be something positive about Christianity,
Hmm.
right? Like so like if you think about your life prior, which I think some people would be like, he said that he, was struggling with some things and wrestling with whatever. Like it wasn't that bad. Like comparatively then and now, do you feel like you were happier then or do you find that you're happy now? Like what does that shift look like?
Yeah, I think for me, if I'm putting my mind back to how it used to be, um,
Mhm.
it was it was happiness back then, but when I look back, it was a faux happiness. So it wasn't genuine. It was just a lot of fillers. So
Yeah.
I was again friendships, hanging out with friends. I definitely always felt happy. I had the feeling of happiness being around them, laughing, joking, talking about sports, movies. Um,
Mm.
but after those moments, kind of just went back to real life. Like I went back home, or there's always a sense of something missing. And so I think that even though I didn't necessarily have a relationship with God, God was always there. And it brings me back to that text that if you raise your children, that once they get older, they won't depart. It's a paraphrase, but I do believe that that's what happened. Um,
Yeah.
because God was always in our household with my parents, um, it never allowed me to fully be sad. Because again, I saw a lot of positive um, fruits from my parents.
Yeah. Like just looking back, God is so good, and it takes on a different effect for me since I've known you for a while. Um, and I think that's the wonderful part about the gospel and how God changes us, because seeing where we talk about this a lot, but seeing where we were, the conversations we would have, the thought processes we have, the ideas that we had for what our life should be, like where we wanted
Mm-hmm.
it to land compared to now and how we're content wherever God has us, like that's a miracle. Because I remember the conversations we had, and the conversations we had were not necessarily about Jesus. We were talking about how are we to get that next dollar, or how are we going to go do this next thing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like there's a miraculous part of the gospel, and there's so much more we could talk about, but I don't want to make this this episode super duper long. But
Mm-hmm.
like understanding, especially as a Christian, understanding what it looks like to have Jesus as our friend, as our companion, is already transformational. But seeing what the work that Jesus would have us do currently, looking in his word, which we're going to be doing through this podcast, is
Mm-hmm.
what makes it even more joyous, because we see that Jesus didn't just set up this world and leave, as some believe. Jesus has been guiding us step by step and has been guiding us through his word.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to see how we're going to break into that as we continue to go through the podcast. But
Exactly.
Luan, thanks for sharing your story, man. It's been a blessing to me, and I'm just praising the Lord to see what He's been doing in your life and what He's doing so far. And obviously, without it needing to be said, I'm thankful you're my friend, man.
Oh, well, praise the Lord. So yeah, we're gonna try to make this consistent. Um, where our our timing sometimes won't be aligned, but our goal is to do this weekly. And so we'll see how God leads. And again, if it doesn't end up being this way, give us grace. Um,
Amen.
this is definitely something that Jerome and I are committed to, and we feel like this is what God is wanting us to do as well. So, again, we are looking forward to having you guys be a part of our journey. Not our journey, not our journey in the sense it's just Jerome and I, but our journey collectively as children of God.
Amen. All right, everybody. So we'll catch you next time.
All right, guys.